Welcome to the ThePPod.
Right, hello and welcome everybody to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Now, as you know, as part of these podcasts, we're really keen to explore all aspects of the partnership in relation to safeguarding children. And we're really keen today to talk to Jayden, who we've got in the studio with us today, talking to us about safeguarding in midwifery. So Jayden, welcome along. It's good to see you.
Hi, Steve. Thank you for having me.
No, absolute pleasure. So thanks for taking part in this, because we are really keen to kind of look at all aspects of safeguarding. And I think quite often when we think about safeguarding, we tend to think about children's social care, maybe the police sometimes, but actually understanding safeguarding runs throughout all aspects of any roles within working with children. So we're really keen to kind of talk about midwifery today, if that's okay. And I believe in your role, am I right in thinking your title is a vulnerable women's midwife? If I can get my words out, a vulnerable women's... No, I can't say it. I'll tell you what, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I work, well, we're called WREN Team, that's our overall team name. And we kind of call ourselves complex care midwives. Some people call us vulnerable women's midwife. Some people call us safeguarding midwife. We've got a few different names. People have got different preferences, but generally a complex care midwife. So we're basically the safeguarding team for maternity, is the best way to describe us.
Brilliant. Lovely. So it's so in terms of kind of you and your journey, how long have you been doing this for?
So I've been a midwife for 3.5 years now, and I've been in WREN Team for just coming up to a year now, so not hugely long.
Okay, right. So what got you into this sort of line of work?
Oh, wow. I never would have imagined being in this kind of role. When I first started my training as being a midwife, I never really even considered safeguarding as part of it, really. And I moved to community a couple of years ago, and in community it's quite a large part of our roles. We're getting to know families in the antenatal period and seeing them at home, and we can kind of detect those vulnerabilities a little bit more in that community setting. And we get a lot of support from WREN when you're a community midwife, because we get involved in care planning for families with extra vulnerabilities. And I used to not enjoy safeguarding in the slightest. Right. I really didn't enjoy it. And that was a confidence thing. I felt it was a bit intimidating almost, of not knowing what to do and how to approach things. Over time, my confidence really grew, and then this role came up for joining WREN Team, and some of the managers were really encouraging me. I thought, I couldn't imagine anything worse, doing safeguarding full time. But actually, as I grew to love it, I thought, you know what, I'll give it a go, and I'm so pleased. I really love this role. It's absolutely fantastic.
Brilliant. Thank you. And it is challenging, isn't it? But
yes, absolutely.
I think that's part of the challenge of it, part of the joy of it is being able to make that difference.
Absolutely, for sure. And I've got a wonderfully supportive team, and that makes a huge difference. That's very necessary in these kind of roles.
Brilliant. And in terms of the WREN team then, that's sitting within the SFT, the Somerset Foundation Trust? Yeah,
absolutely. So we've got midwives that are originally part of Yeovil and part of Musgrove, and obviously we've merged into that Somerset FT, and we work all across Somerset, that the area Somerset FT covers.
Thank you. So if we can get stuck into the role itself, so what sort of role does a complex care midwife play in safeguarding children, and how importantly, sort of how does that differ from other healthcare professionals involved in child protection?
So we've got a couple of different kind of roles that we have within complex care midwifery. So part of it is that we caseload, so we care for women who meet certain criteria. So, for example, women who are homeless or are drug users, particularly things like cocaine and heroin, or women just with generally extra vulnerabilities or who are a bit younger. So part of that is providing them with continuity and home visits to make care more accessible for them. The other part of our role is supporting the midwifery team. So we call it triaging. So whenever a midwife has any safeguarding concerns or vulnerabilities about a family, they put in a form just to give us a little bit of background on what's going on. And we basically make an agreed plan of what we think would be helpful to support this family. And also every working day, so Monday through Friday minus bank holidays, we ring round the inpatient wards and just see if they've got any concerns of cases that may have come up, because of course the wards get things like domestic violence disclosures and things like that. So we have quite a few different small roles within being a complex care midwife. And I think it's very, very unique, the role that we play within safeguarding children, because in most cases, say for health visiting or police, they're attending a child, that they can see how well their needs are being met. They can see, are they being looked after? Are they being fed? Are they meeting their milestones? Whereas for us, a lot of the risks are very theoretical.
Right.
I mean, there are cases where we know that unborn babies are having harm done to them. For example, if they're being exposed to cocaine or domestic abuse in the mother, we know that does harm a baby. But otherwise, it's kind of looking at a vulnerable family and going, well, do we think that we can meet the needs of your child almost? So that can be quite tricky of knowing. It's just also theoretical, looking into the future rather than looking at a child that's not being cared for. And that can be quite complex and tricky to manage sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's always a keen focus, isn't there, about getting the voice of the child.
Absolutely.
So when you're talking about unborn babies, I know, how do you do that? How do you sort of think about the voice of the child within that?
I always think of it very literally, of thinking of what does a baby need. And I think about it of both unborn and when they will be born. So, for example, I say if an unborn baby could talk for themselves, they'd want to grow in a womb that isn't being exposed to drugs, or a womb that isn't full of adrenaline because the mum's being abused, or because there's a risk of there being a hit to the abdomen and hurting them in that way. And I also talk about theoretically when that baby is born. And for example, if mum hasn't got a home and she's sofa surfing, and I'll say, well, a baby would want a warm environment, a stress-free environment where they're safe to grow up without being worried about where they will be living. So it's all very literal and theoretical.
Yeah, but like you say, it's important. And I think, what sort of situations do you see? And you've mentioned domestic abuse there and drug and alcohol use. And what are sort of some of the common sort of situations that require your involvement?
Gosh, it's a huge range, if I'm honest. There's a lot of kind of lower level stuff that we do in a triaging sense of things, of the forms that come in, of families that have extra vulnerabilities, particularly around perhaps parents who are mentally unwell but still able to meet the needs of their baby, but we need to make sure that they're really well supported. Within my actual role of caseloading, I mean, the other most common scenario is people who unfortunately have had very difficult childhoods themselves, and that is kind of transpired into them struggling to have a bit of a stable lifestyle, and therefore how they'll meet the needs of their baby can be very tricky. If you haven't been parented well as a child, your template of how to be a parent then is very tricky and very different. So that's the other very common scenario where we get involved as caseloading, is people that can't meet their needs of a child for that kind of reason. Yeah.
And it's interesting. I do talk quite often in training that I deliver about this kind of expectation that we have of once you become a parent, you suddenly know how to be parenting, you know, and you know what that looks like, you know what you've got to do. But I think it's an important point you raised in terms of actually we kind of receive that either from our experiences and sort of that our experiences around us of sort of other parents as well, and learning from that. Whereas if you haven't had that as part of your experience of growing up, it's very, very difficult, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the families we look after, the vast majority of them are very, very keen to, they say to me, I want my child to have a different life. I don't want them to experience what I experienced growing up. And what they're giving is often so much better than what their parents are giving. And it's giving them the right support to be able to keep on growing and learning, and for them to understand really what a good parent looks like. But then also what's very tricky is, what is a good parent? There's no one way to parent. That's right. There's lots of different right ways to parent your child, but it's just giving them the ability to safely meet their child's needs, and also look after themselves as well.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you. So, and what are some of the sort of common signs or red flags that might indicate that a family might need your involvement, your support?
Gosh, I think that's a really tricky question to answer in our role, because I guess to say, if you were interviewing a health visitor for this reason, they might say, oh, a child not meeting their milestones, or a child not gaining weight. Whereas for us, the vast majority of the care we give is in pregnancy. We're often only involved for a couple of weeks after birth, where perhaps there might be issues with babies not being fed or changed enough and things like that. And for us, really, it's history, but more very recent history, shall we say, because, you know, we have lots of families who come in who may have had a very historical involvement in drugs, and they've been clean for several years, and we celebrate that and we go, great, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to now care and look after your baby, doing a great job at making some amazing improvements, and people who say on a methadone programme are doing absolutely amazing work. So I guess it's people who are currently involved in, I don't know if chaotic is quite the right word, because that sounds a bit judgmental, but just a lifestyle that perhaps isn't very calm, and they struggle with housing and family relationships and just things like that. But it's such a wide range of things that can be a red flag as such, but yet there's not anything in particular. It's a lot of different things.
So within your work, then I'm sort of picking up that multi-agency working is really crucial.
Oh, absolutely.
In first, I guess, like you're saying, partly around identifying families that might need your support if there's drug and alcohol services involved or domestic abuse services. What sort of services do you work with?
Gosh, everybody and anybody. So we often get emails from GP surgeries when a woman falls pregnant and they feel particularly worried. They'll say, "Oh, we want to make you aware that this family does have a history. We think they'll need extra support in caring for their baby." I would like to say drug and alcohol services. We work very closely with mental health teams. A lot of people who've had these very traumatic upbringings themselves, they do tend to have lifelong mental health problems as a result of that, of processing that trauma. So a lot of the women we care for do have mental health services involved. Children's social services, family intervention service, health visiting we work very close with. I work very close with schools actually because I at the moment have a lot of under 18s on my caseload, so a lot of them are at school still, so I work very closely with schools and colleges. So just everybody and anybody involved in the family we are keen to work closely with, and if nothing else it's for the benefit of those parents as well, because having all these professionals involved can become very messy and complicated, and we go, oh well, what did the mental health team say when you last saw them, or what are schools saying? So if we could all just get together and work together, it's often a lot less stressful for the parents as well.
Yeah, and having that joined up approach is so crucial,
Absolutely.
isn't it? And everybody having a role to play within that.
Yes.
And not feeling like everyone's got to be a specialist in all areas, because there are specialist agencies out there.
Yes,
such as
absolutely.
yourself. But, okay, so could you explain to us kind of it's a difficult area of work in terms of what you do, and I'm sure there are kind of many sort of challenges and barriers that you often encounter. How do you sort of overcome some of those difficulties, some of those challenges for yourselves, and kind of really work to effectively safeguard children?
I think part of it is within our role trying to provide that continuity and build trust with parents. A lot of parents that we look after, and again it's not all, but just a good amount of them can be quite wary of professionals, either because they've had children removed from their care before, for example, or because growing up they've had a lot of judgment or discrimination perhaps, or because the way their parents taught them of how to act professionals. And it can be very, very tricky to get parents to engage as a result in maternity services, particularly if we've done a referral to children's social care. That can draw a lot of trust away from that kind of professional relationship. So for me, it's almost like being this persistent and also consistent person in their life, that I will be here, I will be turning up at this time, and if I don't hear from you, I'll still turn up and knock on your door. I've got my phone, I work set days, set hours. If I'm ever on annual leave, I'll tell you if I'm off. So people know what to expect from me. I make that very clear from the minute that I meet them of this is when you can expect to get hold of me. And it's just building that trust, because ultimately the more a mother engages with maternity care, the more care her child's going to get, and therefore the safer it is from the child from the get-go. So it's definitely just building that rapport and that trust with families as much as possible, and being very candid as well about why I've referred you to children's social care and why I want you to have this support and what I'm worried about. I always tell my families, I will tell you if I'm worried about something, unless I really, really can't because there's some sort of dangerous reason, which is very, very unusual. I'll always tell you what I'm thinking, what I'm worried about, what I'm feeding back to social workers. And what I'd really appreciate is if you tell me what you're worried about and what you're thinking, because that's really important.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's a real fear of being honest with parents, with people, and worries if I say this is going to go horribly wrong. And I know firsthand it's not always easy to do that, but actually I always sort of try and personalise it and think, actually, how do I want to be treated? How do I want people to work with me? And actually, we know over and over again, families will say, we just want people to be open and honest with us.
Absolutely. And I think that's about professionals asking questions as well, because I think I've come across lots of midwives and care assistants and things who feel very awkward asking certain questions. And if we've got, say, for example, we're very concerned about domestic violence, but we're not getting a disclosure from that woman, I'll say, have a really frank conversation. Say to them, look, because of this, I'm a little bit more worried, and these things are leading me to feel concerned that perhaps you're being abused by someone. And I'll say, you're either going to get two scenarios. You're either going to get a woman who isn't being abused, and we'll just kind of brush it off and go, oh, well, but I'm glad they're asking people because that's really important. Or you're getting a woman who is being abused, and she's probably going to be very grateful, even if she doesn't disclose still, but she's going to be so grateful that you're really trying to give her that space to disclose to you. Yeah. And you're not going to get a horrible, terrible reaction from that. People are often very like, oh, okay, no, I understand why you're asking that, but no, that's not for me, or yes, that is to do with me.
And I'm just thinking in terms of involving, and you've talked a bit there about sort of involving parents and caregivers in that process, in that conversation. And how do you kind of involve parents and caregivers in the sort of the with those kind of really sensitive or complex situations? How do you kind of approach that?
I always say to people that your voice is really important. You're this baby's mother and father. Your voice is the most important voice here. And also it's the one that can sometimes get very lost when we've got lots of professionals involved. And I think it's just giving them that space to say, look, this is what we're worried about. How do you feel about that? And being able to talk to them one-on-one as well, because when we've got these big meetings, lots of people, it can feel incredibly intimidating. So giving them a choice to express those thoughts and voices independently. And actually with if we've got a child under child protection, under children's social care and child protection, when we do our conference reports, part of that report that you write is asking the parents about their views. You give them the report and you allow them to feed that back to you. And I just always make it very clear to them that it can feel very hard to say, I don't agree with this, when you've got children's social services involvement, because it can always feel like you want to be on the perfect straight and narrow and just agree with everything everyone's saying, but you don't have to. Your voice is so important.
Absolutely. Yeah, everyone playing a role within it. And that's the whole point of a child protection conference, is the whole point of a child protection plan, is to make sure we've got everyone's voice in that.
Absolutely.
So, brilliant. I know, I'm just sort of picking up around and sort of working with parents. There's also been quite a large focus on engaging better with fathers and male carers, certainly over the last few years. I think one of the things coming out from a lot of the national reviews that have taken place is around non-accidental injury to very, very young babies, largely, not solely, but largely perpetrated by fathers or male carers. And I know there's been quite a focus on this over the last few years. So I'm just wondering if you're able to kind of explain some of the work that's taken place within midwifery, sort of improve that area of engaging with fathers better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of midwives are much more keen to get fathers involved, get me in the appointments. For myself and a complex care team, I do a lot of work around giving birth and all the options you have, and then parenting afterwards. And I really encourage partners to come along to that and play a really good role involved in that. And, they're just as important as a mother in a scenario when it comes to parenting their child. We've got a lot of resources out there now for the ICON campaign, which focuses around those non-accidental injuries and coping with a crying baby, because what we know is that often around these non-accidental injuries, it's a baby that's persistently crying and unable to settle. And we are really, really encouraging of midwives to tell this to both parents and wait for an opportunity where both parents are there and talk to them about it together, because you're a team in that scenario. If one of you is feeling very frustrated about your baby, if the other one's feeling calm, then brilliant, you can hand that child over. Or if you're both feeling frustrated, for you to both recognise and step back and go, okay, we need to pop baby down and just walk away. Once they're safe, walk away for a few minutes and calm down. And we've got brilliant work with the Maternity Voices Partnership. I believe you're talking to Donna in a podcast coming up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And they're doing Dad's Breakfast to try and bring, Dad's Breakfast Club to try and bring dads together a little bit more. And we have got some more resources. So one really good one that I love is something called DadPad. And that focuses on just really simple resources about meeting your child's needs and how you can get more involved in caring for a child as a father, including if your partner's breastfeeding, for example. But I mean, being entirely honest, there's a lot more out there, but with how short-staffed and cash-strapped NHS is, there isn't enough. There still isn't enough to really get dads much more involved than that. But it's certainly a brilliant improvement, but we could always do a little bit more. Yeah,
I think that's always the sort of the message, isn't it? Is there's always more to do, which is great. Yeah, there's always more to learn, always more to do, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Lovely, thank you. In terms of the kind of situations you face, and obviously every family situation is different. There are lots of dynamics going on, often very complex situations going on. Are there any kind of unique kind of ethical dilemmas or considerations that arise when working with complex care families in relation to safeguarding children?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I think what can be quite odd within my role, particularly as I mentioned earlier, I look after quite a few young mums at the moment. And if they weren't having a baby, they would be treated as a child themselves. And all of a sudden we're thrusting them into the world of being an adult in all, from the view of a court and of a view from Children's Social Services. And we now have their baby that we're worried about. And it just plays quite a unique role around consent and understanding. And don't get me wrong, I have some 16-year-olds that are absolutely bright as anything. They're so on it. They're really understanding. They do loads of research, loads of looking up. And then you have some people who, particularly if their education was poor growing up, can really struggle to understand the processes going on around them. And that can feel feel very, very difficult. And then, of course, we have, it's slightly separate from safeguarding, but consent around childbirth and pain relief. And of course, they are consenting people. It's just very unique that in any other scenario, you'd probably have a parent or carer involved in those things. They don't have to once they're pregnant with a baby. And we also equally look after lots of ladies with learning disabilities. And I not long ago looked after a lady with quite profound learning disabilities. And it was very hard for her to fully understand what was going on. And it then made it harder for us to understand what she understood about caring for a baby and if she felt that she could meet her baby's needs. So it can be quite unique the way that pregnancy makes you treat people when outside of it they would be treated very differently.
Yeah, no, there are lots of complex situations on there, and I think you just talked there about people with learning difficulties. Actually, sometimes there's a view of like, well, they shouldn't be parents. They can't possibly be a good parent. But actually, with the right support and the right education, actually, I've known some fantastic parents with learning difficulties who do an amazing job.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's no reason why they can't parent their child. It's just having that right support in place, like you say. And what can be quite difficult is, so I've cared for a lady recently, for example, with quite profound learning disabilities who also had no support network around her and had a very difficult childhood. And then that can be hard about how do we manage that support for the rest of you and your child's life together. There's no reason that without the right support that she can't learn to be the most wonderful mother.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I just want to pick up from what you were saying around support networks. And I think we need to acknowledge we're in a period of time at the moment where we are coming out from, we're out of the COVID lockdown restrictions. And I'm just wondering kind of whether you've seen sort of much of a difference over the last few years, sort of going from through the pandemic period and the restrictions around that to sort of things now that we're coming out from that.
Oh, absolutely. I think, like I say, support's one of the biggest things. The rate of non-accidental injuries in Somerset we know increased over lockdown. And I think being caught at home all day with the same people must have been very, very difficult for some people. In fact, I think for a lot of people, whether you had a baby or not, that was a very, very difficult time. I think what we're also seeing is, professionals weren't around in the same way. Home visits changed massively. A lot of people weren't visiting people's homes. And of course, that means that we've had families who have required support, but that support hasn't been given to them during that time because we didn't necessarily know what was going on behind closed doors. And one thing that's really important about midwifery is we do home visiting after a baby's born. And if we have any concerns, we offer it before birth. And we often offer it before birth for other reasons as well, like home birth assessments or because our clinics are full. But we only really do it if we've got extra worries, we want to see what the home environment is like. And that can really help us to understand the dynamics around a family of what's going on. And, sometimes I hear about families being very, very overcrowded. So, for example, I'm looking after a family at the moment who I think there's 6 of them in a 2-bedroom home.
Right.
It's incredibly squished. But then I went to their home and they're making it work amazingly. It's not a long-term solution, but they've done a fantastic job of moving this house around and it's working absolutely brilliantly for them at the moment. So not having that insight during lockdown has been much more tricky, and it can often be very hard for people to come in and say, my home environment isn't okay, it's not right, it's not clean enough, it's not right, or I haven't got enough that I need for my child. It can be very hard to admit that to professionals. So having someone come in and see those things can often be much easier for us to understand the needs of a family.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And just to kind of round things off a little bit, I just think, and we talked earlier about there's always improvements we can make, there's always learning we can sort of gain. I'm just wondering, in your experience, what are some of the sort of key changes or improvements that could be made in the field of safeguarding children in complex care situations, and kind of what role midwives can play in really kind of driving those changes forward?
Well, my first answer isn't very specific to midwives, but it's just got to be we need more time and money in maternity, in all safeguarding services, really. I mean, there are many occasions where we give the midwives a plan for a family and say, this is what would be great, this is what this family would need for support. And the family would really appreciate that support as well when you offer it to them, but having the time to actually implement that plan is just not there. The midwives are very, very stretched, particularly out in community settings, and that's where a lot of safeguarding really takes place. And even in, say, for example, in inpatient settings as well, we have difficulties of women coming in, disclosing domestic violence, and then the wards are just incredibly, incredibly busy, and the midwives finding it really hard to prioritise things. And then again, things can get glossed over and the right support isn't offered. So on a wider level, I'm sure everybody that comes here says probably a similar thing. I would absolutely love there to be more funding. I mean, the biggest thing is, I think, confidence and training.
Okay.
Of midwives knowing what questions to ask and what to do when they get those questions answered. And I think often not knowing what to do is a bigger issue, because I think sometimes midwives feel a little bit apprehensive to ask a question in case the answer is, oh yes, actually I'm really struggling with my mental health, I'm really struggling with my baby, and I've got suicidal thoughts, or yes, I am being abused, or yes, I am using drugs. Then for them to then know what next steps are, not knowing that, can feel very scary, and it can feel very silly sometimes when you stood there going, well, I'm not actually sure what I'm meant to do. And that's no kind of, I'm not at all trying to criticise those midwives on the ground floor. Their job is primarily caring for women in a more physical, in giving birth and things like that. They don't deal with these things every day, and that's when you can kind of forget the processes. But that would be the biggest thing, is just building those midwives' confidence to help them, and giving them the time to then follow through on those plans and things that need to happen.
Brilliant. Jayden, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really, really interesting kind of talking about the role that you do. I'm just wondering if anybody wanted to find out more about midwifery in Somerset, or specifically about the WREN team, how could they find out more?
We do have a little page on the Somerset FT website. If you look up maternity page, we do have a little segment that has WREN Team on it, with a little bit more about us, and also some contact details if you ever wanted to get in contact. We do have families get in contact and actually say, someone I know is pregnant and I think they could do with your support. We're always happy to get emails from people if they ever have any questions, or they're ever worried about something they want to tell us about.
Thank you so much, Jayden. It's been brilliant talking to you today, and really appreciate taking the time to come out here and go through the work that you do, which is absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much. Keep up the good work. And we look forward to catching up with you again sometime.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jayden. It's been brilliant.
Thank
Cheers
you.
Then. Take care. Bye. As always, we hope you found today's episode informative. If you'd like to find out more on any of the topics discussed in today's episode, please go to the SSCP website, somersetsafeguardingchildren.org.uk, as well as clicking on any of the links contained in the description. If you have any questions arising from today's episode, or would like to be involved in a future podcast recording, we'd love to hear from you by emailing us at theppod@somerset.gov.uk. My thanks again to our guests for joining me in the studio today, and to you for listening. And we look forward to you joining us again next time at ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.